Hello and welcome. I'm Bill Scheer. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about screen direction and continuity. Let's start with screen direction. This is simply the direction in which your subject is facing or moving, and it should not change between shots. In these shots, our subject is facing screen left to screen right. Now, if we suddenly change that screen direction and make it screen right to screen left, like this, the result is pretty disorienting. But if you maintain clear screen direction throughout your story, your viewer will better understand what's happening. When somebody watches a TV news story, they're using those individual pictures that we edit together to create a mental picture of the scene. But if you violate screen direction, like this, you disrupt that picture. So, how do you maintain screen direction? One way, called the 180-degree rule, is to keep the camera on the same side of your subject. So if you start on the left side of your subject, stay there. Imagine an invisible line right through the center of the subject. If you cross that line, you violate the 180 rule, and this can make for some awkward video. Look how unnatural these two shots are when edited together. Plus, if you avoid crossing this imaginary line while shooting, the editing process will be much easier. Let's talk about the 180 in even simpler terms. If your subject's facing screen right in one shot, they can't be seen facing screen left in the very next shot. The 180 rule also applies when shooting more than one subject. In this example, the invisible line runs between the two subjects' faces. As long as you stay on the same side of the line, in front of the subjects in this case, one person will always face screen right and the other person screen left. But if we cross the 180 by moving behind the subjects like this, notice how jarring it looks to the viewer. Our subject who had been facing screen left is now looking screen right, and vice versa. Now, does that mean you can never cross the 180 while editing, or you can never allow your subject to change screen direction? No. As with all rules, there are exceptions. If you want to change screen direction, let your subject complete the change on screen, like this. Or if you started shooting on one side of the 180 and you're suddenly forced to begin shooting from the other side, a transition shot lets you move to the other side of the subject without confusing the viewer. It's actually pretty easy. You have several types of shots that can act as transitions: neutral or head-on shots, cutaways, and extreme close-ups. If you use these shots properly, you can move to the opposite side of your subject without distracting the viewer. But what if the person you're shooting changes direction and you don't catch the movement on camera? Your best bet there is to insert a cutaway to separate those two shots that have opposite screen direction. Or you can let your subject move out of frame in the first shot, then pick them up in the next shot with the opposite screen direction. The whole idea here is to cover any breaks in screen direction so they don't confuse the viewer. Another key factor to consider when trying to help your viewer develop that mental picture we talked about is continuity. This is simply maintaining a smooth flow between the shots. For example, a subject shouldn't be answering a phone in one shot, then writing on a whiteboard in the next. An extreme example? Sure. But the same principle applies no matter what your subject is doing. An easy way to maintain continuity is to allow the subject to move into and out of the frame. For example, in this shot, we see the subject already in the frame. If we allow him to move out of the frame, we can cut to another shot of the subject moving into the frame, and that maintains continuity. If we didn't allow our subject to leave the frame, the resulting sequence would look like this. Obviously, that creates a jump cut that ruins the continuity, and worse, it's jarring to the viewer. And speaking of jump cuts, allowing action to leave and enter the frame is a great way to avoid them, even in the most basic sequences. Obviously, we can't go from the subject's hand on the mouse to her hand on the keyboard. That's a blatant jump cut. But if we let the subject's hand leave the mouse and go out of frame, we can show her doing something else in the next shot, in this case, typing. Or if we start with a shot of the keyboard and her hand out of frame, we allow her hand to come into frame, again, avoiding a jump cut. Okay, now let's talk about positive and negative action. These types of shots help you tell a more effective story, simply because they help the viewer understand what's going on. Plus, they also help you to maintain that all-important continuity. Shots featuring positive action involve your subject moving into the frame toward the camera. In other words, positive action represents the beginning of something. Negative action shots involve the subject moving away from the camera, and in some cases, out of the frame completely. This makes for a great closing shot because it represents the end of something. It visually tells the viewer that the story is over. So to put together a story that flows smoothly and doesn't confuse the viewer, just follow these simple rules. Keep consistent screen direction by not crossing the 180. And maintain continuity by letting your subject enter and leave the frame. So that's it. Screen direction and continuity are essential to effective storytelling. If you understand these basics, you can effectively tell the stories of our service members without losing your viewer.